Hi, welcome to a Curve tutorial video. My name is Natan Cohen. I'm the head of customer success here at Curve. And in this video, we're going to be covering RLS, also known as record level security, end to end. So first, we're going to start with the basics, what RLS is, why we use it, and then we'll get into how we go about configuring it. And then we'll go into some basic examples of how to pass individual values. So with that, let's get into it. So record level security, what it's used for primarily is as a security filter to pre-filter records before users even load the dashboard and filter it further from there. So the most common use case for a record level security filter, especially if you have a commingled dataset architecture, is to filter by tenant. So if you have a column called tenant ID, org ID, company ID, that's the most common type of field for record level security. But you might also have the concept of different roles for users within a single tenant, and RLS would be great for further restricting the records based on role, or really anything else. But the most important thing is that RLS is used as a security filter. In other words, when the filters are applied, the users accessing the dashboard should not be aware that those filters are applied. They should not be able to see those filters, and they certainly shouldn't be able to change those filters. So with that, let's go into a data set and take a look at how we configure RLS. So configuring record level security is always a two-step process. The first step is identifying which fields we want to designate as RLS fields, and the second step is actually passing the values, but that's done when we embed a widget and we're creating the widget configuration object. So we're going to do part one here, and I'm going to designate product ID as a security column so that some end users can see all the products, other end users can only see a subset of the products. So you first start by designating a column for record level security. So we click the three-dot menu, enable, and then you need to give it a security group name. And this is how we're going to reference this field in the JSON widget config when we actually pass the values. So it's perfectly fine if you give the security group name the same ID as the field name, though it should not contain spaces or special characters. So I'm just going to call this product ID using an underscore. Okay. So now I have one field configured for record level security, but remember that every change you make to a data set is always in draft mode until you apply. So I'm going to hit apply changes, and now my record level security is in effect. So the second part is to pass the values for the product ID security group that we just created. But before we do that, let's pop over to the partner portal and let's take a look at exactly what it is that we're going to add to the widget configuration object. Okay, we're going to add a property called permissions, and permissions takes an array of objects. Why an array? Because we might have multiple data sets to define record level security for, not just one. And then, of course, it's a nested hierarchical property. So even within a data set, you can have multiple columns configured for RLS. Okay, so permissions is an array of objects. At a minimum, we have to pass at least one data set. And then we have to pass at least one set of record permissions for at least one security group name. And then we're going to pass at least one value. That's what we're going to do first. Just a very basic record level security example, passing one product ID value as the security value. So with that, let's copy this code and let's paste it to the clipboard, and we're going to go over to Visual Studio Code and add it from there. So here we are in Visual Studio Code, and what I'm going to do is add the record level security permission block to the widget configuration object. But where I'm going to do it and how I'm going to do it is what matters. So what we're looking at is my backend REST API for generating secure JWT tokens and encrypting sensitive properties. Record level security is always a sensitive property. You never want to expose the values that you're limiting the user to. And remember, a widget configuration is always visible client side. So what we want them to see client side is the encrypted JWT token, not the actual RLS permission block. That's why I'm adding it here to the code that contains other types of sensitive properties like my app, user, and client ID. So what I'm going to do is clean this code up a bit and be right back. All right, I'm back. And what I did was just remove some double quotes around my JSON config properties, and I added some indentation to make the whole thing more readable. So this is going to be the most basic example of record level security, and we're just going to pass one product ID value to start with. But first, there's one thing that we can clean up here. We don't need any and or Boolean operator because there's really just one value that we're passing. There's no need for Boolean logic, so we can remove that. And then we know that our security group name is product ID, so I'm going to add that. And I'm going to choose a product ID that I know exists, 344. And now what I need is the ID of the data set that I'm filtering. Now, there are API endpoints that you can use to get this information, but the easiest way to get it is actually from the URL when you're back in Composer on the dataset design page. So let's flip back to Curve Composer and see where we grab that value. Here we are back in Curve Composer, and we are looking for the dataset ID to pass to our record level security permission block. And if you look up here at the URL, you will see some internal IDs. The first one follows the application path. That's the ID of my application. The second one follows data-uploads. That is my dataset ID. So if I copy this to the clipboard, I can go back to Visual Studio Code and add it there. Okay, back in Visual Studio Code, we're going to go right to the dataset ID. We're going to copy and paste the dataset ID in, and now we have a fully configured basic RLS security block, and it is ready for testing. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and my REST API backend is Node. So I'm going to now restart my Node server, and I'm going to give this a test. So I'm going to give this a test right now using my local HTTP server that I set up. And as you can see, it rendered some data, not a lot of data. So it looks like it did work, but how do we know it worked? Well, if I'm an end user, one of the things I may try to do is add a filter on the product ID column. And now you can see that I am limited to only 344, and I don't see any other products. It's as if the other products don't exist. So that's how I know that the RLS value has been successfully passed. One more thing to mention about record level security is that when you do go into a data set and designate at least one field for record level security, you will not see the data set locked down or restricted in any way when you're in Curve Composer. Just to demonstrate that, if I were to go into the product inventory dashboard, which uses that data set, I could add a filter on product ID, and as you can see, I can see all of the product IDs. Now that's actually fine because your tenant end users will not be interacting with this dashboard in Curve Composer. They will be interacting with it in embedded mode as the widget is embedded into your core application. And in embedded mode, record level security must be passed as long as you've defined one record level security group on that data set. Now, if you don't want to go through the entire process of implementing record level security and you just want to make sure that for testing purposes in embedded mode, you can see the exact same thing that you see here in Curve Composer, what you can do is you can pass a wildcard For the values of all of your security columns, the wild card you should use is star. And you can do that for testing purposes until record level security is implemented. So with that, thank you very much for watching.